Hello, class. Today I'm going to speak to you and tell you about the sad story of Miss Jane McCrea. Miss Jane McCrea was born near Sarasota, New York, and she lived there with her family. They were loyalists, and she ended up getting engaged to a man who later joined the British cause up in Quebec under the leadership of General Burgoyne. And from there, they had moved south. So Miss Jane wanted to go and be reunited with her fiance. She proceeded to stay with a Miss Sarah McNeil, who was also a loyalist friend and was a relative of a British general. But in my research, it doesn't name who that general was. But what happened is, during that time period, Miss Jane and Miss Sarah had decided that they wanted to go meet the troops at the camp. And so General Burgoyne decided to send some Wyandotte scouts ahead to go bring the ladies and bring them to the camp. During this time, there is much debate as to what exactly transpired during this period. A lot of the information and the history is basically from newspaper articles, and her story is a propaganda tool that was utilized by the Americans in order to incite hatred and rage against the British during this time period. This is due to the fact that Miss Sarah and Miss Jane were met by the Wyandotte scouts, and while Miss Sarah survived this encounter and later told her story, which was that they were attacked by the colonists, and Jane was shot and killed by these colonists. This is not the widely circulated version of events. The widely circulated one was that upon the separation of these two, Sarah was taken as a captive. Jane, for some reason, was killed and scalped, and this was done by the Wyandotte Panther, as he was known. He proceeded to bring the scalp to General Burgoyne, who accepted the scalp, and part of the story is that her fiance was there, saw the scalp, recognized the hair, understood that his fiance was dead, and the British ended up paying for the scalp due to a long-standing fact that they would pay the Native Americans money for any scalps they brought in that they claimed were American citizens. So basically, the story kind of continues on as this was major propaganda, as the British basically financed a murder. It was also General Gates, who was an American general during this time period. He wrote a scathing letter to General Burgoyne stating, "How could this happen? You let this poor Jane McCrea travel in her wedding dress," and allowed her to be scalped and killed by these savages. So as the story progressed, it continued to get worse and worse and worse for the British. Her story was utilized obviously as propaganda against the British. It proved to the American colonists that the British were unable to protect loyalists. It increased their recruitment efforts. It brought upon sympathy for not only Jane and Sarah, but for anyone that had suffered at the hands of the British. And propaganda is a very useful tool. We see it today, and we've seen it throughout history, how you can incite people to violence, to rage, etc., all on hearsay or whatnot. The story of Jane McCrea is difficult for historians because there is no actual historical evidence that survived today. And according to course guidelines, historians must be objective and honest in their investigations, and this is the best information I could find about the story of Jane McCrea.